Okay. All right. Looks. It looks like we are connected. So I'm just double checking, and I'm going to be closing out some of these extra windows that I don't need. Because right now my computer is really being taxed for some reason.
These days.
Yeah. Okay, listen. So, guys, if you're just not signing in with Country, I do believe we're live across LinkedIn. We should be live across LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook, all those good places. Had a couple little difficulties here with our technology, I should say, but I think we're getting through that. All right, so just to kind of get on board here, I want to make sure that we are online. I'm double checking now. Let us know if you can hear us okay, if the sound is good. We want to make sure that it's a pleasurable experience for you who are watching. We're covering a very important subject today about leadership, how to hack a leader. How can we actually recruit for leaders in a much better way? I imagine some of this will actually also resonate with some other positions as well. Let me just double check my chat here. Okay, it looks like we're live. Okay, now without further ado, I'm really excited about today's guest. His name is Mr. Lou Adler. If you haven't heard of him already, he's been in the recruiting game for several decades. But here's the thing. What he has to share with us is very relevant to what we're facing today. What we've been doing for the past 10, 15, 20 years is no longer relevant. We've got to really relook at and change the way we're looking at recruiting these leaders. So I've got someone who has a LinkedIn course, on LinkedIn Learning. He is the president of a wonderful company that does recruitment consulting, helps companies to get better at recruiting and that sort of thing. He's also the author of Hiring with Your Head, which is another great book I've been also enjoying. But without further ado, welcome to the show, Mr. Lou Adler.
Hey, great. Nice to be with you. Nice to be with you, Rollins.
Excellent. I'm going to pull up my LinkedIn. I'm going to be monitoring. If you want to see us react to your comments live, we're going to be looking at those on LinkedIn. So hopefully you're watching from LinkedIn. I do want you to put in where you're coming in from what city, what state, what country. And I also want you to put in your questions. We want to make this very interactive so that you, as the watcher, the listener, what have you, can get your questions in and we get them answered for you. Okay, I see several have already piped in. Wonderful to have all of you, Doreen, Hayden, Isabella, Stephanie, Dr. Julie Olson, glad to have you here as well. Appreciate all of you being here today. And let's get right into the subject. As you look at the landscape of recruitment, especially recruitment for leaders and just recruitment in general, what are some of the things that you've noticed as of late as how the market is shifting in the way we recruit?
And I assume that question was to me, right, Rollins? So
Yes,
let me
sir.
kind of just make a general statement that it's always been difficult to hire the top 25%. And I define a leader. Let me just define what I call a leader. It could be any senior staff position, engineer, accountant, marketing, 1 to 2 years experience and above, obviously managers and executives. And I would contend that people in the top 25% would all classify as leaders. And a leader, in my mind, not only does great work, but they also expand the work that they do. They do it better, they do it quicker, they build better teams, they build stronger teams, they improve things, so they take on a lot more activity and they deliver the results. So now, given that context of what I've seen change, it's always been difficult to hire those kinds of people. Number one, everyone wants them, so that makes it a little bit challenging. Nowadays, it's even worse because a lot of people are leaving and those leaders are leaving, but they're not applying to jobs in traditional ways. They don't apply to a job. Since they're pretty good people and everyone knows them. When they're looking for a job, they tend to reach out to their own personal network and say, hey, I'm thinking of leaving, and they get hired I'll call it in a hidden job market. And there are ways companies can get into that hidden job market, but it's not going to be sending an email to somebody or posting a job that looks like at best, a lateral transfer with a lot of hyperbole around it. So I think things have gotten worse now because of, I'll call it the Great Resignation, which I'm not positive that's true for leaders, but they're certainly moving, but they're not doing it in the same way. So I think that would be the context. I think things are changing more rapidly today because of the economic circumstances. But over the last couple of decades, if not forever, even before I got into this game, it's been hard to hire those kinds of people on a consistent basis.
Yeah, that makes sense, Lou. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that I was when I was reading your email that you sent about how to hack a leader, that whole concept. One of the things that resonated with me is that with those postings that, like you said, you just talked about it just a second ago, that it's at best in a lot of cases a lateral transfer, what it looks to be. A lot of times what I see HR departments do is they will pretty much lay out what the requirements of the job are and do some level of a job description. But one of the things that you said in the past to me is it doesn't really represent the job more so than it does the person. They don't really get a good feel as to what the job entails. So can you talk about some ways that companies can improve just describing the job when they're just actually describing it to a potential candidate?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to go back to 1978 in doing that, because it's a story. It was the first search assignment I ever had, and it was for a plant manager in a company making automotive components. And I happened to know the president of the company. I had a background in manufacturing prior to becoming a recruiter. I had been through dozens of factories, electronics factories, automotive factories, old line, new line, and even at the state-of-the-art factories in the late 70s. Nonetheless, when I knew the president was looking for a plant manager, and he gave me a job description, it was handwritten, but it listed 10 years of experience, manufacturing engineering background, this kind of industry background, managing these kinds of people, and all these must-haves. Obviously, results-oriented, good communication skills, and the stuff that you would still see today. So I knew the president, well, even if I didn't know him, I would have said it. I said, Mike, this is not a job description. This is a person description. A job doesn't have skills. A job doesn't have competencies. A job doesn't have academic background or personality traits. Let's put this person description in the parking lot and tell me what you want the person to do. Let's really define the job. And he said, I want this person to turn around the plant. And I said, let's go out in the plant and take a walkthrough to see what you actually need done. We spent an hour going through the plant. It had logistics problems, performance, labor problems, manufacturing problems, had a bunch of problems, 6 or 8 problems. And basically add them all together, we'd turn around the plant from an underperforming plant to a top performing plant. I said, I'll find someone who can turn around the plant and achieve these objectives. I have never, in those 40 plus years, 44 years now, and thousands of assignments and working with hundreds of companies, maybe more than that, but certainly a lot. I know my team working on lots of different assignments. We've never used a job description listing skills. We say, what do you want the person to do? And then we say, why would a top person want this job, which is the employee value proposition? So when I go out to people who are in the top 25%, I say, hey, this is what we need done. Here's why it could be a good career move. Let's chat about it. So the idea is, by defining work as a series of performance objectives, you can engage in a conversation with a person, demonstrate that that job represents a career move, see if the person's accomplished things comparable to that, and if there's some growth and stretch, the candidate would say, yeah, I'm interested in pursuing this. So the idea is focus on past performance, doing future performance to see if there's a fit, rather than the traditional interviewing and what I would call the boring and generic job descriptions. I know that's a lengthy conversation, but I think telling the story of what that means is probably a better way of doing it.
No, I like it. I love that story. It really helps to exemplify just a different approach, right? A different approach to just posting a job description that doesn't really, like you said, describe a person. I'm sorry, describe a job. It describes a person's skills. Don't describe a job. It describes a person. Now, thank you, Robert and Ellen. Appreciate you. She's coming in from Philadelphia, and we appreciate Robert. He says he goes. I want to hear what you say to this, Lou. He says, just curious. Everyone wants to hire leaders, but if you can't develop them internally too, that's a red flag to me. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. When you think about it, we did a big survey and probably over 10 years, but certainly we asked, where do people get promoted? And I'd say a third to 50% of people who get promoted are internally. And you're right, if it was 80 to 90% of the people had to be hired from the outside, I'd be very concerned. Yeah, and so I totally agree with that issue. A good portion of these leaders or for management jobs should be internally generated. What is the right mix? Should it be 50-50? I don't know. But clearly, if a good portion of people aren't promoted internally, that would be a red flag. I do totally support that.
Yeah, and I'm of the same camp. But I do feel like at some point you're probably, especially if you're growing at a rapid pace, you're not going to be able to grow those leaders at a fast enough pace to keep up with some of the recruiting needs that are out there. So you probably need to have a mix of both. So I'm agreeing with you on that. I wanted to get into what your thoughts are on today. What is the biggest mistake that you see companies make out of all? Because I know you see quite a bit of them. And then what's the way to counteract that? What's the way to fix that when it comes to recruiting either leaders or just recruiting in general?
Well, let me kind of say everybody wants to hire people in the top half. And since everybody wants to hire those people, you can't define a job that's pretty basic and boring. So if you ask me what one problem is, it's how people write job descriptions. That's the big one. Number two is HR lets hiring managers off the hook. To me, it's the real responsibility of the hiring manager to define the work and HR to get managers to define the work. And I talk to CEOs all the time, and 100%. In fact, just last week, I talked to a company looking for a chief financial officer. It was a company in the food business. And he had the same thing. Need an MBA, need a CPA, need 10 years experience, need 10 years of industry background, have to understand this and that. And I said, no, that's a person description. What do you want the person to do? And it was really set up all the financial planning and control systems so the company could grow 2x in 2 years. I said, now that's compelling. You can't just write a boring job description and expect a good person. And you can't expect to just be efficient doing that. If you spend more time with the right people, you'll actually be able to hire people in 30 to 60 days, but you'll hire better people by narrowing down who you're going to go after and make it a personalized experience rather than make it a impersonal transactional experience. So you asked me, what's one problem? No, it's a host of problems. It's that people think hiring is a simple thing to do it with technology. When you're affecting people's lives and if these people don't need a job, you can't. That's a personal experience. If you're just trying to fill a role with anybody who applies, that's a transactional situation. That's what people have been doing for years and trying to do that part faster. So this is one that gets me all the time, Rala. So I could go on. I wrote a book about that. It's called Hire with Your Head, which 4 editions of it, and it's still the same issue. There are the same foundational issues. Is you can't hire the strongest people using a process designed to fill jobs when you want to offer people careers.
I want to go over this chart. You sent this to us ahead of time. I'm going to put it up on the screen for us here. There it is right there. The big difference in hiring leaders and everyone else. Did you hear that?
Well, I can hear it. I did.
It's on the screen. I got it up on the screen with you now.
Yeah. So what's your question, Rollis?
No, I've got the screen. I want you to just kind of describe this to the audience here, your thought process, because I've got this chart that you wanted us to have for our audience.
I see it on the screen. I see it there.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me also suggest that you can download this chart, and you might want to put this in your chat so people can see it. Hiring.tips/box 10. So hiring.tips box 10, it will give you an interactive version of it. But I just went through, and if you looked at hiring as a big system, hiring leaders, and let's call them, which is equal to the top 25%. Number one is a strategic issue, and that's what the chart shows. And the column on the left is the key steps to hire leaders. And in my mind, you're hiring using a strategy that says attract the best people as opposed to weed out the weak people. But when you post an ad and have people apply and make it a demeaning process, that's weeding out the weak with the hope a good person applies. What's the likelihood that a top 25% in high demand is going to go through that process? So basically, you've excluded anybody good. You just hope that a good person will get demeaned and go through the process. So the strategy issue is the first one. The second one is, how do you actually interview these, or how do you actually write the job postings? And I basically say you got to make them stories. And I think if you click on the chart itself, the downloadable chart, not obviously the one you're showing, I give examples of what I call stories. Make it story based. Hey, we need someone to come in and turn around this plant and achieve something pretty remarkable. So a lot of what we do is tell stories, and we get people into a discussion rather than into a transaction. And I just say, hey, sell the conversation to see if it's a career move, spend more time with fewer people, and it's a different process. And the reality of it is, if the hiring manager isn't doing this, it really won't matter, because the top 25% don't really trust recruiters. Let's be real frank. The recruiter's the middleman. I've been a middleman for 40 plus years. And it's the idea the hiring manager has to take full responsibility. And if the hiring manager doesn't, it's probably not going to happen. It's as cynical as that may sound, it's the truth. Good hiring managers know how to hire good people, and they don't need HR to tell them. They already do the right thing. What I'm describing is what good hiring managers do, but HR can't be the substitute for the hiring manager. The hiring manager has to follow those rules with the guidance and assistance of HR and recruiting. Can't hear you, Rollis.
Sorry about that. So I know folks who are watching this, I'm going to flip it around the other way for a second. If I'm a leader, I'm thinking, okay, I want to take my particular situation to the next level. And you're telling me that I've got to make sure that I endear myself to these different hiring managers if I want to get that next opportunity. What are some things that you would suggest to someone who is either a recruiter that's trying to get invisible in front of more of these hiring managers, and then, or conversely, the hiring managers trying to be more visible to those candidates that are the top tier candidates? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me kind of just say, so you're taking from the perspective of a recruiter trying to work with a hiring manager? Let me just take that relationship first. And I've been a recruiter for many, many years. I haven't done real recruiting for almost 10 years now. We help companies train recruiters, and we help hiring managers do both what you're just saying. But as a recruiter, so now I'm working with a couple of investment groups where all I do is I work with the board of directors and the CEOs of these groups. And the question I always ask 100% of the time is, what does this person need to do to be successful? The same thing I'd asked 44 years ago. This is not a job description, it's a person description. Let's put the job description in the parking lot. What does a person need to do to be successful? And I've been in just recently, high-tech electronics, a lot in the food industry, new state-of-the-art foods, and somehow I got into investment group. And when I ask these questions, I say, okay, what does a person need to do? What would they do first? Build a plan. They do some alternatives. They get the resources. They just walk through this process of success. And in every case, 100% of the time, the CEO says, wow, you really know this job. And I don't know this job. I just understand how to extract from them how they can understand and articulate the job. And they'll ask me, do you want to do the search? Because you really know this work. No, I don't. Well, I don't want to do the search. I need to have more sleepless. I don't like sleepless nights. I had 35 of them, 35 years of them, I should say. But the idea is and this is where the recruiters are afraid to challenge the hiring manager. And if they don't have the confidence to challenge the hiring manager, they're never going to be successful. Because I'll tell you, a good candidate's going to challenge a recruiter and say, well, tell me a little bit about the job. And if you give a bunch of gobbledygook, you're just going to lose the credibility that you have with a possible candidate. And I think it goes both ways. So my standpoint is, in the book, Hire With Your Head, was really to train hiring managers to do it properly. And that could take a whole book to explain it. But I tell a hiring manager, you got to define the job first, which if you look at Gallup's first break all the rules and Gallup's Q12, they define the 12 things that the greatest hiring managers do. And the first one is clarify expectations up front, support people, let them grow and develop, and give them work they like to do. I mean, it's kind of common sense, and yet it dumbfounds me that recruiters or hiring managers aren't willing to do it. And yet the best hiring managers all do it. So to me, why they don't do it naturally is still beyond my comprehension, but I'm too old to figure out how to come up with a solution.
Well, you're doing it now. I mean, you wrote the book and you're on a show now showing up. So it definitely helps us, those of us who are hiring managers or recruiters. So what I got from you is that a really, really good hiring manager, if they're coupled with a recruiter that can get them in front of the right folks, should be able to, for the most part, close those folks based on their ability to recruit for the position. And another thing I got from you too is that the recruiters themselves need to be more, they need to challenge the hiring managers more, ask the tough questions, clarify what the job really is, versus just kind of moving on and not getting the best candidates they can possibly get them. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, let's say this, if they can't challenge a hiring manager, excuse me, they can't challenge a hiring manager to find the job, they will not be able to convince the best candidates to get interested. So there's a sequence of steps that you define there, like the domino. If they can't do that, hiring manager won't trust them, so that won't matter, and the candidates won't trust them, so all they're going to do is push paper, and hopefully one of them sticks.
Makes
But
sense.
then they focus on skills, which isn't the criteria that a good candidate defined. Good candidate, I mean, let's be real frank. You tell a good candidate, why did you take that job? Not one of them would say, because I'm going to be doing the same work I've done for the last 10 years. I'm doing the same work over and over again, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. Nobody says that yet, but that's what, when you peel behind what most hiring processes are, that's what you're saying. Hey, I'll give you the same job you had, and I'll give you a little extra bump in salary and go from there. And hopefully you take the job without really knowing what it is.
Makes total sense.
I'm somewhat cynical, if you could imagine, Rollis. So.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So one of the things too I remember that you've said in one of our prior conversations is about making decisions, and a lot of times, and you just touched on it, a lot of times candidates, folks can make long-term decisions based on very tactical information, strategic decisions on tactical information. And if we're not good at communicating what our true offering is to that candidate, what they'll be doing that might be exciting or different or new or growth oriented, then we're going to get a bunch of folks who are making tactical decisions, and that it won't be best for them, and it certainly won't be best for the company, based on what my experience tells me and based on what you're talking about.
Well, let me kind of tell us another story, because this is how I developed that. It was probably still 30 years ago now. I had a candidate who I thought was going to, and my early career was all in manufacturing type companies. So I had a job for another plant manager in the electronics industry. At the time, this candidate, the job was for someone to build upgrade a manufacturing facility to make state-of-the-art displays at the time, whatever they were. And I thought the candidate was going to take my offer. He calls me on Monday, says, I'm going to take your offer. On Wednesday, he calls me, says, Lou, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take your offer. I've got a better job somewhere else. So it was kind of shocking to me at the time. But once I got my composure, I said, can you tell me about this other job? And it turned out it was for a better title, it was for more money, and it was closer to home. But I said to him, I said, John, you've just made a strategic decision using tactical information. Alternatively, I said, you're making a long-term decision using short-term information. Are you aware you're going to a company where 2 to 3 years from now, you're in an old line, the job you're taking is an old line manufacturing company. You're not going to be any better in terms of the industry. You're going to be stuck in this industry. I said, how you spend the next 2 to 3 years will determine the rest of your 5 or 10 years. So yeah, you might be getting a little more money. You might be a little closer to home, but you're sacrificing your career to do it. In this company, you're going to be in a state-of-the-art manufacturing, putting in new technology, new manufacturing equipment, using the latest state-of-the-art quality control systems. And yes, you're making a little less money, but you're putting yourself on a faster growth curve. He then said, let me ponder that. He calls me the next morning and says, Lou, I'm going to take your offer, which was for this state-of-the-art company. 9 months later, he calls and said, Lou, that was the best career decision I ever made. I've just been made VP operations. We're setting up 3 manufacturing plants in the Far East and China. This is when China was expanding dramatically, and he became the president of the company eventually. The idea is that you've got to balance what you get on the start date with what the work you're going to be doing. And so I always ask candidates, I said, how would you compare this job on a 1 to 10 scale to everything else you're looking at? And look at it from what you get on the start date, the work you're going to be doing, and where you could go if you're successful. And when you really think about it, most people just have great detail around what they get on the start date, but they have very little detail on what they're going to be doing and what they can become if successful. And I think that's a fundamental problem that hiring managers have, companies have, and candidates have. They just make these short-term decisions. And then they wonder why 3 to 6 months later, they're unhappy with the job because they made a stupid decision based on what they got on the start date. Nobody gets satisfied for the money they've got. So I asked candidates, I said, think about the best job you've ever had. The best job you've ever had. Was it because of the money or because of the work you're doing and the people? And it's never the money. It's always the people and the circumstances. And if they don't like it, it's because they don't like the hiring manager, they don't like the work, and they don't like the people or whatever it is, but it's not the money. Oh, you're getting a lot of money, but it's a crappy job. Money is not a ongoing satisfier. Yeah, you got to be competitive, and I recognize that, but don't sacrifice the long term for the short term. Put your mic back on.
Just checking in with the audience here. I was checking in with the audience.
Your little slide there. That was pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, my audience really appreciate what you just said. So I got several comments coming in. Robert Berry, he says, yes, he agrees with what you're saying. He says, we currently, just about overall, write horrible job descriptions, but Lou's book, Hire with Your Head, was great, and it helped me to write better job descriptions. I guess he read one of your previous versions. He said years ago he read that.
4 editions, yeah. Buy the current one, though, boy, it's pretty slick.
Yeah, I've started. It's really good. Okay, Doreen, she says, I believe the key is to improve communication to ensure that everyone is on the same page. It will help to communicate the company's value, inspire trust, and attract. What are your thoughts about that, about communicating the organization's value and inspiring a trust and attraction? Is that
I'm sorry, I'll be the cynic. It's useless. Nothing to do with it. I don't care your company values, your company culture. It's all about the hiring manager. I mean, if hiring manager is the one who does the communication, you got a crappy hiring manager in a company with great culture and great values, but a crappy hiring manager, they got a crappy job. I'm so cynical about that. And actually, there was a study by populous.org, the American Workforce Index, that actually proves that. Company branding is it only is important for entry-level jobs, and the reality of it is, none of it's true. And I'm being totally cynical here. It's the hiring manager that is the person, the carrier of the company culture. And if you got a good hiring manager, clarifies expectations, supports and develops people, the company can be great even if you got crummy values. On the other hand, you have all the great values and a crummy hiring manager, you got a crummy job. I'm sorry for being so straight and practical, but that's HR speak, and it's BS.
Wow.
Sorry,
how do you really feel? So, Lou, how do you really feel about this? I mean,
right. I think it's that kind of mindset that screws up the workforce.
Wow. Okay.
I know. That's scary, huh?
So I will say this. I can see both sides of it, but I see what you're saying in terms of the crummy hiring managers can, even if it's an amazing company, they could make that job experience the worst experience ever if they're a bad hiring manager. So I'm 100% on board with that. Where I would give you a little bit of pushback on the value side is that if a company has bad values, and I've got a great manager, I'm probably not going to be super attracted to that company because of what they stand for, even if it's a good manager. So, what are your thoughts on that? I want to hear what you say on that.
But where do you get the values? What determines the company values? How does that translate? Tell me one company, Rallis, and anybody on this call, one company that's got terrible values. They all have the same values. They all want to be trustworthy. They all want to grow. They all want to support their people. They all want to support their customers. Tell me about one company that's got bad values. It's all bunch
Okay.
So everybody has good values, but the values translate into the hiring manager and what you do every day with your team and your responsibility. Now, if the company is crooked, well, it'll pretty much know that they're crooked and they're making bad decisions. And look at this woman, Theranos, with that. I mean, obviously everyone knew that company was a phony company, but they hid it from the world. So there's very few companies that don't have good values. So then they present this false, oh, we got great values. Why are you better than B of A or Wells Fargo or Microsoft or any company you name? They all have good values. But it translates into the real work is what you do day to day with your team and the job you have, and the hiring manager dispels it or manages you. So I go back to Gallup's Q12. That really lists what a great manager does, and companies should then take those 12 things and make that their value system. But they've got all these. I don't want to say phony value systems, but it's all BS. And I think there's really a lot of research that shows that in terms of how people drive and get motivated and satisfied has nothing to do with their company values. It might be interesting to con a entry-level person or someone who needs a job, but you're not going to con someone who's discriminating and a top performer.
That is a very interesting take. That's a very interesting take, Lou. I'm going to have to marinate on that one a little bit. You gave me some things to think about.
Talk about it, yeah.
Wow.
I'm old enough to make that claim, but I've been around for so many years. I mean, I talked to a company that had great values making food products. They didn't have the E. coli problem. They didn't do it intentionally. It's what happened because somebody in the factory made a mistake in terms of food product coming in or some vendor. I mean, you just start thinking behind the scenes, what really goes on? Does Amazon have bad values? I think there are some managers at Amazon who screwed up a situation and created a problem. I mean, even you look in Glassdoor, it's always a problem with a specific hiring manager that people complain about, not usually the company values.
That is very interesting. Okay. No, okay. All right, let me move on here. All right, so, and Doreen, she said, such an insightful conversation. She says, don't sacrifice the long-term for the short-term, preach. So she loved that point you made. She says, if you get a good hiring manager but bad company cultures, it won't work either. That's her thought. Okay. So, and I'm kind of with her on that, but you gave me some things to think about, Lou. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but here's you got a bad culture. What if the person in the hiring manager recognizes, hey, I know you guys are working your heart out and we're making bad decisions, but in our department, we're going to do it right and we're going to do it effectively. And I'm going to make sure that you're developed and managed the way you need to be, and I'm going to do everything I can to give you the best experience you ever have, despite the fact that we're working our hearts out and despite the fact that money is tight. And let's see, any company that's got financial pressures is going to compromise certain things. The hiring manager can act as a buffer for that. But if you look at the root causes of why companies get into trouble, it's usually because they didn't make their numbers, the financial situation, they've got competitive pressures. There's usually some economic force that causes that to happen. Not that and they still have good values, but the economy said, no, I'm sorry, guys, we got to lay off X number of people to survive.
So the case you're presenting really is that the hiring manager, just the way I'm filtering it anyway, the hiring manager is such an important role in the company that a bad one can basically take it down and a good one can bring it up just by the fact that the hiring manager has such a pivotal role, because you're saying that it trumps culture and values of the company is the individual hiring managers. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think the culture, you really think about company cultures is really, what is your culture like? You don't know what the company culture is. Every day you're dealing with that hiring manager. And if that hiring manager is demeaning, a miserable person to work for, I don't care what the great culture you have, that's going to be a miserable job. On the other hand, if a hiring manager is supportive, understands your needs, can develop you as a person, assigns you work that you find satisfying, gives you the resources to do it, this is a good job, despite the fact all these other problems you might be facing or the company might be facing day to day. So to me, the hiring manager is the primary driver and definition of culture as the candidate, the individual employee experiences it.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge the audience, those of you who are watching, whether you're watching live or the replay, and if you don't feel comfortable putting it in the comments, you can direct message me. But I want to hear what you guys have to say. Have you heard of a company that has bad values? Because I never thought about that before. Now, all of them have good values, actually. Well, I guess also what you're saying is that you have to, since most companies all advertise and show themselves to have good values, it's no longer a differentiator if everybody says that. So we got to find a way to differentiate how our opportunity shines above whatever other ones that they're listening to at the time. Am I reading that right?
That's how I interpret it. But on the other hand, let's assume you can find a company that has bad values, and the job would be you're being brought in to change those values and improve the situation at our company. And I would contend that this plant that I mentioned, that first job from 44 years ago, it had bad values. I mean, I walked through the plant and you had 300 people there that were goofing off. You had crappy products. They had a lot of scrap. They were producing stuff. They were shipping stuff that to me was marginal product. Well, that had bad values. Well, we're bringing a plant manager to change that whole focus. But if you just, if you don't define the job that way, you're just going to bring someone who needs a job. And the candidate we had, he was excited about it. I remember walking through the plant with the candidate who ultimately got the job. This was 44 years ago. He was salivating. Oh, God, this is going to be so much fun turning this place around. You could just see it. It was really kind of cool. And people get excited about that and these are leaders who want to make things happen.
You know what? You just made me think of something. I was speaking with a nurse not too long ago. And she's an experienced nurse. Every hospital is going to want her. She says if she applies for 10 companies, 10 of them are going to make her offers, okay? But one of the things she told me is she wouldn't necessarily be repelled by a hospital that's having trouble, like the value is bad, right? They're not presenting a good situation, as long as she could be part of the solution. And what you just
Absolutely.
told me, it resonates with that. That sometimes, even if it's a bad values, bad culture, if they're brought in and shown that you can be part of the solution, that's another way to recruit them.
Now, I think you just hit it 100%. To me, that's how you hire leaders. Now, it might not be a terrible situation, but they want to be part of the solution. And when you look at what drives human performance for leaders or anybody in the top half, it's not just about doing the work competently and getting paid. It's about making a positive impact on that organization. And it could be building the team. It could be helping patients. It could be turning around the processes at some business or some hospital. So absolutely makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, you're kind of turning me around here. You're turning me around. Okay, all right. So here's something that Robert said. Oh, he agreed with you about Elizabeth Holm at Theranos. Yeah, she's horrible. Definitely bad values. Okay, lots of other well wishes. Great company, great conversation. Thank you for that, Ellen. Thank you also, Enrique. Okay, Enrique says, I know a company with false values. No one posts their garbage, but you can smell it as soon as you step foot in it.
That sounds like where I want to work, and I'll help the company turn around.
Okay, Dr. Olson, she says, when you talk about values, there's a difference between stated values and actual. Ooh, that's another one. Okay, difference between stated values and actual values that are lived out in the everyday workplace. Most have good values that they advertise, but the actual are different. Okay, what's your thought on that, Lou?
Yeah, I think the reality of it is you can say what your values are, but how do you validate that on the job? And to me, I would just want to ask, now, if you were a candidate and you were a discriminating candidate, you just say, well, tell me a little bit about how your values translate to this work that you've assigned for this specific job. And I guarantee no recruiter will be able to make that translation. If the hiring manager can't make the hiring manager would probably be, give me a break. Here's what the job is. Here's what I want you to do. And here's how I'm going to support and develop you. I guess I would just confront them somehow, as opposed, I don't really like this generic hyperbole and BS, as you can probably tell. I've been kicked out of a lot of meetings because of those kinds of things. So, because I pretty much call a spade a spade, and I don't tolerate BS too well, as you can probably tell, Wallace.
I'm getting the picture. I'm certainly getting the picture here, Lou. Okay, so Lou, this is interesting what you said about the overall process. When we're attracting leaders, we're looking to attract this leader, and we get into the habit of job requirements and then casting a wide net and then weeding out the weaker candidates, and then you pick from the stronger ones. But what you're talking about is different because you're really only going after who you perceive as the best candidates. Is that right?
100% right, yeah.
Okay, so here's the question that comes from that, though, is how do you know which candidates are the best and the top of the industry? And I want you to give kind of some general advice to those in the audience of, first of all, how do you identify who those best leaders are so that you can attract them?
Okay, so let me kind of go through a couple of ideas. We have a training class for recruiters, and I basically say only talk to people who are semifinalists or candidates who can, or people who know semifinalists. And I say that a semifinalist is someone who can do the work. And I tell hiring managers, they have to be able to meet these performance objectives. I won't compromise on that work. But don't, and even this company that I talked to last week, the president of a company in the food industry, he said he's looking for a CFO, had to have food industry background, had to have 10 years of food industry background. I said, Rick, he has to have enough food industry background to do the work. I don't know if it's 1 year or 10 years. It could be 1 year in automotive or 10 years in automotive and 1 year in the food industry. I understand they have to understand the cost controls and the planning and the FDA requirements, but they have to have enough to achieve the objective of setting up the planning and systems to support 2 years of growth and 2x in 2 years. That they have to have enough. How much that is. So it was always about don't compromise on the performance objective. So that's number one. That's a semifinalist. Number two, now, if I know the person, it's pretty easy to say if they're in the top half or not. But from a sourcing standpoint, and I can go to LinkedIn and I can look for what I call recognition terms. There are certain things at the top half that these potential leaders have or people in the top half have. It's some level of recognition. Either get promoted faster. I mean, if you got someone who's a director in 5 years, you probably got a pretty good person. If someone is managing a team of 15 people and they got 3 years experience as an engineer, they're probably a pretty good person. So you can start looking at if they got asked to speak at a major conference, they're probably a pretty good person. I remember finding a director of internal audit by looking at the speaker list for internal audit. It was something to do with international consolidations. And it was like 10 years ago. So I just went to the internal audit speaker conference, the list of people, and I said, who's speaking about this? I called someone up and he's the one who got the job. So it just start thinking about what these people's profiles look like that puts them in the top half. They always get recognition. I mean, it's 100% of the time. Then I have to also look at would the person, I mean, even this person who got the job from the international auditing group, he was a director. I had a spot for a VP. So I knew he would be interested in it. So it's the thing, the semifinalist, it's two decision makers. Would the company see the person? I won't compromise on performance. I won't compromise on being in the top half. And it also has to be a career move. Now, the way I get all these people is I get referrals all the time. If I'm doing a search, which I haven't done, I just spend most of my time getting referrals. And if I was going to do that CFO search for this food company, the food company was in Atlanta, I would start talking to all the partners at CPA firms in Atlanta, and I'd have a name in 2 days. A partner would love to get some of their alumni into these kinds of jobs because they might get a new account at some time in the future. So you just got to think out of the box as opposed to let's post a job and hope a good person applies. No, let's get on the phone and talk to people who know these people. I can't hear you, Wallace.
This is very interesting. Actually, Robert is an internal auditor, right? And he does speaking engagements. So what you just described Robert, who's one of our viewers. That's one of the people you would find because he actually does. He speaks at conferences for internal auditing. That's interesting.
This is actually international consolidation. So if Robert has internet, at the time it was going through this big new accounting standards change and how they were going to international tax, whatever it was. And I just looked at people who had done that and I found a person. It was that was an unusual one. But if you start thinking out of the box, that way, you usually can find people a little bit unusual. And I just call the guy up and say, hey, how would you like to talk about this?
And I just want to thank Doreen and Dr. Olson, Julie Olson, and Robert, Enrique, all of you guys who are actively involved in this conversation. It just helps to make it more vibrant. I see Farah just came in as well. Thank you, Farah, for being. She's just very interesting. So thank you for doing that, guys. Keep those comments coming. I really appreciate it. Okay, so one of the things we didn't do today, we didn't do our water break, but you've been taking some little tea breaks, I'm seeing, which is good. I'm just gonna take a little swig here too. I need to ask you a question. If you were just now starting off in your career as a recruiter, this is many moons ago, what is that one piece of advice you'd like to give yourself, if you could?
Boy, that's a good question. I think it's different today than when I started. So my background, I wasn't born to be a recruiter. Maybe I was born to be a recruiter, but I didn't start out at that. I have an engineering degree, and I was an engineer for a couple of years. I got an MBA in finance and accounting, so I did that for a couple of years. I worked in manufacturing. I worked in automotive industry, first handheld calculator business. I worked in international deal making. So, and I had been through in financial planning and budgeting. So when I went into being a recruiter, it was easy for me to be confident about knowing the job. So if I had to say, if I was starting today, I would certainly specialize and I would start building a network in a niche area. Let's assume it was auditing. I would know a lot of auditing. If it was in manufacturing, I would make sure that I knew these people and I met these people. If it was software development, I would probably take a couple of classes in software. I'd really understand it. I'd start talking with people. I'd start sitting in with hiring managers and understand the job. And I'd really have this confidence of understanding the work. And I think that's really the key. Is I think too many recruiters, they think they can get by box checking. And when you're affecting a person's life, you can't. You really have to understand the job, the hiring manager, and environment you're putting a person in. I mean, I take it very personally when I placed a person. I took it from a business standpoint because I guaranteed my client that I would find a good person. But I also guaranteed to the candidate that this would be a good career move. There wasn't a monetary situation there, but that forces you to do a lot of due diligence, a lot of work. So I forced the hiring manager, I forced the candidate, and it forced me to do that due diligence. But you have to have confidence and knowledge. You can't just use paperwork and hopefully you'll find a good person and because they're desperate and they need the job, and the hiring company is desperate and they need to hire someone, and they put a transactional process together. So to me, that would be the advice I'd give. Hey, you're affecting a person's life, do it right. Mike.
I like that. Sorry about I was so caught up with what you were saying, and my audience loves it too.
Yes, I can see how come you got the people there? I've never been feeling people, and none of them are wearing masks. I think you've got a problem here.
Yes, you're right. I do. Yeah, that was a pre-pandemic shot of a potential.
Yeah, you think? Oh no, I thought it was real. God, you fooled me.
Oh well, hey, listen, this hour has flown by. I really appreciate your time, Lou. I definitely feel like this needs a part 2 or some kind of follow up because this is great. So what I know you've got a great conference coming up or a great event coming up. I don't know if you want to just briefly mention that, and what's the best way for folks to contact you?
That's a private event that you're going to, but I do have the Hire with Your Head book club, which is coming up soon, which is next week. So if you buy, what is the website? I think if you go to hirewithyourhead.com, you can join our book club. We have a virtual book club where if you buy the book, and download the materials, we actually review one of the chapters and discuss it. So if you go to hirewithyourhead.com, I think you'll find it there. And that would be the best event if you really kind of want to get into this stuff and learn it. And I'm on my line. I am equally as cynical as I am here today. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And if you're going to go with the supposedly appropriate approach, you'll wind up making average decisions.
Lou, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge. And guess what? You may just end up finding yourself on on Instagram and TikTok and clips all over the place, including LinkedIn. So anyway, I really appreciate having you on today. I look forward to having you back on the show soon. And we're going to put a link to your website in the comments. Joanne will make sure and do that for us.
Oh, good. Thanks, everybody. Good luck hiring great people every time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And before you jump off, let's just make sure we're okay to stop the stream. Let me know, please, Joanne. That was great. A lot of energy there. I tell you, Lou. Lou, you're as usual. You're just out with it.
No,
Okay, well, these are my friends now. I want to make sure.